welcome back to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is Barbara Oakley. Barbara is a professor of engineering at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, and a visiting scholar at the University of California, San Diego. Her work focuses on the complex relationship between neuroscience and social behavior. She's the author of a very interesting book called A Mind for Numbers. Barbara teaches UC San Diego's massive open online course, Learning How to Learn. Let's ask her 5 good questions. All right, welcome back, everyone. My guest today is Barbara Oakley, author of A Mind for Numbers. Hey, Barbara, where are we talking to you today?
Well, I'm in Michigan, and it is rather chilly here today, so I think I'd rather be in California.
Yeah, I was looking at it's going to be 75 today, so it's pretty rough for us.
No fair!
I know. Well, Barbara, you ready for 5 good questions?
I am. Okay.
And before we get started, I had to pay you a compliment real quick that as far as books about sharpening the saw go, and I know that a lot of people are a lot of the readers that we have are big fans of trying to go to bed a little bit smarter than they woke up. And as far as books go for really giving you really actionable insights into how to sharpen the saw and get more done, this is one of the best ones that I've read in a long time. So, Barbara, I really appreciate it. I think I'm gonna get a ton out of it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I have to say that one of the things that we've learned from neuroscience is that you actually wake up smarter than when you go to bed. It's sort of like your brain retools itself during sleep and grows new synapses. So if you've been learning the day before and you go to sleep, you will wake up with more synaptic connections, and in some sense, you'll be smarter, at least about what you're learning about. So I kind of like that.
Maybe I have everything backwards.
Well, people miss the fact that sleep is so important for learning. They just kind of think, oh, well, I'm out of it. But actually, that's when you're growing some of those really important synaptic connections.
Well, that's a good start for question number 1. You described 2 ways that we use our brains, and that's you have the focused method and then a diffuse method. Can you tell us a little bit about each and how they're both important to learning?
Well, one thing that I found when I was working on the book was I corresponded with a lot, like literally hundreds and hundreds of the top science, technology, engineering, and math professors around the world to ask them how they were able to convey ideas effectively. And the thing that surprised me was they often used metaphor and analogy. And they were a little embarrassed to admit it because the more mundane teachers and professors would kind of give them a bad time. Oh, you're dumbing things down. You're making it too simple sounding. But actually, that's the secret of good learning and good teaching. So anyway, what I'm going to do is follow their example and give you a sense of the difference between the brain's 2 major learning modes by using a metaphor. And in this case, I'll use the metaphor or the analogy of a net. So your brain has a bunch of connections in it. And when you're operating in what I'll call the focus mode, and that's when you've turned your attention onto something and you're really focusing, it's almost the equivalent of using a very tightly woven net, right? So the weave is all very close. You have very small meshes. And when you think a thought, it's often moving along meshes that are they've sort of been tread upon before, right? Those meshes have been used before. For example, if you're doing multiplication and you're doing a multiplication problem and you're familiar with that, you're moving along very familiar, concentrated mental patterns. But let's say that you have to learn something completely new, like division, and you've never met that before. Well, it turns out that the brain has a completely different way of thinking, right? So you have the focus mode, but it has a much more relaxed way of looking at the world. And I'll call it the diffuse mode. But really what that is a series of closely related neural resting states. Probably the most important of them is the default mode network. And what happens, you can think of it sort of by analogy, that when you're thinking in this mode, you have a big net. You're the sort of the neural patterns that you're following, in some sense, might be thought of as they're sweeping much more broadly. So you can't home in and solve something really small and focused and concentrated, but you can at least get to a new place in your brain, a new pattern more easily using this diffuse mode, where you can later kind of home in and refine and start building more of a focused mode way of looking at it. So when you're learning something new or you're trying to figure out a new concept, it's very important that you focus it first, right? So get your attention on it. But then when you feel yourself starting to get frustrated and stuck, the more you think about it while you're in that state, the more you're kind of tightly boxing yourself into this little part of the net. You need to get your attention completely off it. And you can focus on something different, or you can go off for a walk, take a shower, relax, take a nap. All sorts of different things can activate these more diffused resting states, which is actually what you need in order to start understanding these new ideas. So when you're learning something new, you want to be able to go back and forth between these two different modes. And people often don't understand that. They think, oh, I'm focusing. That's the only time I'm really learning something. And if I stop, I'm like giving up. I must be, in some sense, not very good at this. But actually, that's part of how your brain works. So you want to stop when you're getting frustrated. And when you're doing something else, you're not conscious of it, but your brain is actually continuing to work on that material. So you're making progress. You're just not aware of it.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting. And it's at this next question, number 2. I read a biography of John D. Rockefeller, and I was fascinated to learn that he had a very structured day. Every day was almost the same, and it would be, at 9:15 to 10:45 he would eat breakfast, and then 10:45 to let's say, I don't know, 12:30 was he would go golf, and then but the whole day was very, very structured. Like he would be working for little bursts. He would then have leisure time. Then he would have some social time. So knowing what you know about how humans learn, what routines would you make sure to include for someone that wants to be a lifelong learner? How would you kind of structure ideally that day?
I thought that was just a great question. I think the important thing for me is, well, I prefer to have a day that's got some looseness in the structure, because it's important that you work away on something, but sometimes something will capture your attention and you want to go a little further than just that minimal time that might have been allocated. So I like to do that with my own. But some people are very comfortable with a good structure. And so what I'd say to them is make sure you're doing something in that day that's like completely unexpected, or just is absolutely irrelevant to everything you think is really important to be working on. So that's something I've really made a point of doing throughout my life, and I think I've benefited from this. There are times in anyone's life, especially if they're learning something, mastering a competency that's really difficult. For example, for me, getting my doctorate in systems engineering, that's not something where I could just kind of putz around, do it for a couple hours a day. And then, it really took focused attention for quite a number of years. But I would always, even at the end of the day, I would be like, you know what? I'm going to read a little bit of history. I'm going to read the National Enquirer. I'm going to do something that's completely unrelated to whatever I'm actually studying and supposed to be learning. And somehow that even gave me freedom so that I could fall asleep more easily. It's like, oh, okay, I've relaxed now. But I think it builds a mental flexibility that can be extremely valuable. Some really, really smart people that I know, they can think really fast, but they're utterly inflexible. If you present an idea that's not their idea, even if it's a better idea and quite obviously a better idea, it's like they're a race car driver and they're going down their path and you've just said turn sideways and they just can't do it. They're not used to it. But some really smart people who I think practice more flexibility in their thinking, they're capable of doing it. And I think we all are.
So you would say that your how you spend your time then is in a way kind of wires your brain in flexibility.
I think so. There's something called interleaving in learning, and it's becoming more and more important. The research is, I think, Doug Rohrer has done great work in this area. And for example, when you're learning a new set of math techniques, if you're working on a book in, say, statistics, you might have a chapter. At the end of the chapter, you'll have the techniques you've learned in that chapter or that section. And then your professor might assign 10 problems of that type to kind of burn it into you. Well, actually, what that does is sort of after you've done the first couple, you're just mimicking yourself.
Yeah.
And so what you really want to be doing in all of your learning, which is never presented this way or very rarely at in high schools and universities, is do a couple problems of one type, then find something that's different and see what the difference is, and then interleave back to where you were. And by doing this, when you take a final in a class, that's really what you're seeing is an interleaving of all sorts of different things at once. And that's why people can often do well in a class, but really flub on the final. They're just not used to teaching themselves to be teaching themselves to be flexible when they're facing, oh, wait a minute, that's from this section. And the reason I'm using this is because, oh, and that's from this. And, they're used to flipping around. And I think it's like that in life. If you set yourself up so you're studying one subject, but then you switch to something really dramatically different sometime during the day, that I think that helps build in this ability to quickly transition from one thought to another thought. And that in turn can help you combine really interesting thoughts in novel ways.
One of the things for question number 3 in your book is this Pomodoro method. Can you explain what that is for us?
Yes, that I think is a vitally important technique, and it was invented by an Italian, Francesco Cirillo, in the 1980s. And Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, and he had a wonderful little tomato-shaped timer. And all you do is take that timer. If you want to be elegant, you can get the tomato timer, but any timer will really do. And you set it for 25 minutes. Now, why 25 minutes? Because it's less than half an hour. It's not that long. Pretty much anybody can do it. Sometimes people will vary the time, and that's okay. But 25 minutes is a good ballpark. Set it, and then turn everything else off. So no instant messages, nothing to just kind of get your little spark of attention, no cell phones, no nothing. And then you work with focused concentration for 25 minutes. Now, and then when you're done, you relax completely. You just go do something, mess around on the web, go out for a walk, or you just kind of take your mind completely off it for at least a few minutes. And you think, oh, well, I'm resting, I'm not doing anything. But actually now you know that learning is continuing, or problem solving is continuing during that time when you're taking the break. So a couple of things to remember are you'd never want to sit down and do a Pomodoro and think, oh, I'm going to finish this entire project or something like that. The whole idea is when you when you're procrastinating, you're often procrastinating because when you look at something that you don't want to do, or you think about something you don't want to do, research has shown that pain arises in your brain. The same pain centers where you experience, the
Physical
pain.
pain, yeah.
Exactly right. So what can happen is um, you can either work through it or you can switch your attention off it. And by switching your attention off it, it takes the pain away immediately, but it's sort of a little bit like an addiction. If you keep doing it, it feels really good, but it can have bad long-term consequences. So the Pomodoro, what it does is it kind of tricks your brain. When you feel that pain, you don't think, oh, I'm going to do this task now. You instead are saying, oh, I'm setting this timer now, and I'm just going to work with focused attention. And you don't even really think about what you're going to work with focused attention on. So sometimes when I'm doing a Pomodoro, I'll say, oh man, am I really, I'm not really focusing because I'm wondering whether I'm focusing. And if I'm wondering whether I'm focusing, I'm not focusing, right?
Yeah.
And I let that thought just slip by, right? And I just get back to work. And the other thing about the Pomodoro is you don't want to, you want to let it just kind of be something that is like you only do it once or a couple times. You don't want to sit there and think, oh, I found this powerful new technique. I'm going to do it for 25 times today, right? You just want to gradually slip it in there, and it makes I teach this massive open online course, and I tell you, I hear from, we've had well over 500,000 students in it, and it's just amazing how many people are like, wow, this technique has made such a big difference in my life. It's amazing. So
Yeah.
it really is quite a powerful technique. Oh, one thing that I do is when I'm doing it, sometimes I'll start and I'll be like, man, I'm 3 minutes into this 25-minute Pomodoro and I can't do it. It's got 22 minutes left and I'll be like, come on, you can do it. And so even the best and, people who practice and they can still struggle with, but you really can. And I think it helps to know that everybody has these kinds of difficulties. And so you're not alone.
Yeah. And I like it because it seems more like focusing on process instead of result, which I think is kind of a key insight that a lot of successful people use is they really focus on trying to get their process nailed right. And then generally the results take care of themselves at that point.
Bingo. That's the perfect way to put it.
So question number 4, most people are familiar with Malcolm Gladwell and the success that he's had of basically looking at current research, whether most of it's psychological, papers, and then finding that same thing existing in story form around in different people and creating a narrative that fits with this thesis that he read about in a recent publication. Now, as someone who wants to be a self-learner, I've wondered myself, should I be looking at primary documents more like what he's looking at? Or is it good enough for me to read his books and get, probably 90% of what was being expressed? And I'm also entertained at the same time because he's a great writer. What are your thoughts on that? Should I be picking up more academic textbooks and journals, or is it okay to just be browsing the bookshelf?
I think it's quite all right to browse the bookshelf. I think you can drive yourself crazy and it can be really quite boring to go perusing the literature, the actual primary sources. That's what you hire writers to do by reading their books, right?
Yeah.
In some sense. I do think that it's important to be aware sometimes, and this gets back to the idea of what my research involves, which is altruism and what is truly helping and what is something that you think is helping but actually isn't helping. And I think Gladwell, I love his writing. He's a master storyteller, and he really does bring out great insights from literature. But he also is, how can I put this? Can be very misleading on occasions because and people, I will read sometimes. People will say, "Well, sure, he cherry picks," and everybody does that, and it's quite all right. But actually, it isn't. Some of the insights that he says, that he relates, are just terrific. But other ones can lead people to the conclusion that, hey, all we got to do is what he's suggesting and we can fix everything, right?
Yeah.
Um,
As if it was like a definitive, like the case is open and shut.
Right, and for example, he gives the insight that, hey, if you're a lawyer and you're studying to be a lawyer and you don't have that good a training, all you got to do is be good enough, and you can go to whatever top university in the world and you'll still do just fine. Well, that may work for lawyers, but guess what? It doesn't work for engineers. It doesn't work for many of the more difficult professions. So for me, I particularly care about the disadvantaged and students who are growing up in school systems that are deeply disadvantaged. And so I find it really annoying to have people think, well, you know what? All you got to do is just get them good enough, and then you can put this band-aid on them so that a disadvantaged learner can go to Harvard. uh, all you need is a few remedial math courses, or one or two. But it's like, you can't fix bad K-12 math education with a few remedial courses. And that actually, and putting people in a situation where they're with a group of very highly trained people who are out of their league because they haven't had that same kind of training for a long period of time, can actually make them feel like failures and cause them to wash out. All of this is completely missing from Gladwell's accounts, and this is very important if you want to truly help disadvantaged learners to be able to be competitive in today's society. So, although I love his storytelling, sometimes I really do get a little
Frustrated, yeah.
disgruntled. Yeah, frustrated at. And for example, he's like, for hockey players, if they just had twice a year selections,
Instead of the
many.
January effect, yeah.
Right. And I'm like, well, yeah, how about 4 times a year selections? How about 20 times a year? Hey, have we ever thought about the fact that, there's a lot of other things to do besides hockey? And so and so sure, you may not meet something, but you'll probably meet something else that's really cool too. And so, do we really want to put all our effort into, making multiple selection dates for hockey? No. Why didn't you think about this when you were, because it seems like a very obvious insight. But even so, I think some of the things he's talked about are just fantastic. It's really opened my eyes to new insights, and it's a mixed bag when it comes to Malcolm Gladwell.
Well, that's good. So, question number 5. I'm sure you get a lot of people asking you, what are some good study habits? I'm always a fan of inverting when I can. And what are some bad study habits that people have? And what are some of the fixes for that? Because hopefully that will ring true for some of the people watching more, and they'll go, oh my God, that's what I do all the time. Maybe I need to reevaluate how I do things.
Well, okay. That is, I'm like, oh, I could just reach through and hug you. That's such a great question. Uh, um, you know, Elmore Leonard did this 10 rules of writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, how about 10 rules of studying? And so then I thought a little more and I thought, what about 10 rules of good studying? And then 10 rules of bad studying. So I've got that up on my website now, and it's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of ways to study horrifically. And I've probably done them all. One of the ways is, for example, when you're reading a book and you really want to understand it, the best way to do it is to look at, especially if it's difficult, look at that page. And if you want to, annotate something on the margins, because that helps you to better neurally encode the key idea. That's what you're trying to do, is pick out the key idea. And then another super good way is to look away and see if you can recall the main ideas that you just read. So I just cheated there and told you some good techniques, but I did that because I wanted to contrast that with what people normally do, which is, well, you move the pen on the page or the pencil on the page, you underline or you highlight, and somehow this motion makes you think, oh, I'm moving it from...
I'm locking it into my brain right now with this highlighter.
Exactly. And it's not. In fact, excessive highlighting is really it's been found to be very ineffective. Rereading is very ineffective. There's a sort of mantra among a lot of teachers and professors. Hey, let's do concept maps, where you like pick a concept and you map it and connect it with other things. Well, guess what? That is not as effective as simply recalling the material as well. So that's a bad way, or those are bad ways to study. Your best bet is always to just try to recall the main. And often we discount the importance of memorization. And memorization can be an important part of gaining any kind of expertise, because you need to have information in your long-term memory. So you never want to discount the importance of, that's a really important equation. You know what? I think I'm going to treat it like a poem and memorize it so I can understand all the components more deeply. Why should we let the poets have all the fun with memorization, right? So, and I think if you're studying with groups or you're talking with people, letting the conversation go off track is a very common one. Not getting enough sleep is a really common way to study very badly.
Yeah.
Because sleep, of course, is when new neurons or new synaptic connections are growing. So if you study, then sleep, you wake up smarter, and you've got more connections. And the more you can block off, so you do like a study session in the day, and then sleep, then another short study session, then sleep, you're actually building a really nice infrastructure. But if you block it all at the end, your brain can only grow so many new synaptic connections. So you're just kind of creating a puddle.
Yeah, it's just water over the dam.
Exactly right. So those are some of the, I think, most important ways to not study well.
That's good. All right, so throw my highlighters away.
A little bit.
I'm just teasing.
Is maybe not too bad, but the best thing is to write in the margin what those key ideas are.
Yeah. So we always ask everybody that we have on for a book recommendation. And this is a book that you feel like just hasn't gotten enough notoriety that you feel like it deserves. What do you have for us today?
Well, I have, and I even wrote it so that I could say it very succinctly. David Sloan Wilson's deceptively small but prodigiously worthwhile Does Altruism Exist? And I think that David Sloan Wilson is one of the greatest thinkers alive today. So I think this little book is very easy to read, but will give you some new insights.
Perfect. Hey, Barbara, we really appreciate having you on the show, and hopefully you're sharpening the saw for a lot of people out there.
Well, I hope so too, and thank you so much, because you're the one that's building the tool shed.
Well, I'm not putting any tools in there, but yeah, I'm putting a roof over it, hopefully. All right, Barbara, thank you.
Okay, thank you.